Hi, everyone. This is Lynn Crawford with Hope Dementia Support, and I am welcoming Shoshana Rainwater here, who is actually Rainwater Dementia Consulting out of Portland. And we are so honored to have her, especially because she is came to us at the last moment when we had somebody sick. And this is a real honor that she would take the time to do this for us. So I'm going to allow her to tell you a little bit more about herself. But before I do that, I would like to remind you that if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat or in the Q&A, but we'll hold all questions until the very end just so that she doesn't lose her train of thought. So, Shoshana, if you wouldn't mind telling them a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really delighted to be able to be here with you all today. And yes, this is a talk that I have put together in a pretty short amount of time, but I'm excited for it, and I think we will get through it together. And I'm hopeful that you'll walk away this evening or go away with something that feels valuable to you. Actually, have an introductory slide, Lynn, on who I am and why I'm here. So I'll get to that in just a moment. Um, and just so you are reassured, yes, we will be sending out the slide deck. So you don't have to scribble furiously this evening as we go along. I should have that in Lynn and Julie's hands in probably the next 24 hours. And I have set aside 30 minutes for the Q&A for our time together tonight. So I'll be speaking and showing you content for the next hour, and then we will have 30 minutes for Q&A. So I just want to make sure you can go into this with a little bit of comfort knowing that there will be time for questions. Um, and yeah, here we go. Oh, let's see. There we go. I said, here we go, and there we go. So I will talk about me on the next slide, but first I just want to make sure everyone knows what we'll be talking about this evening. We're talking about a concept called ambiguous loss, which is understanding the grief of caring for someone who is physically present and yet seems to be increasingly emotionally and psychologically absent. Well, I'll unpack that more in a few slides. We're going to talk about how dementia changes our relationships. And we're going to talk about the changing role of care partner or caregiver when you've likely also been in partnership with the person you care about as a spouse or as an adult child or perhaps a sibling or a cousin. However, this person is either related to you or in your life, you are experiencing most likely a shift in your role. So we're going to talk more about that this evening. And just a reminder, this is part one of two talks. So next month in late June, we will dive deeper into some of the topics like communication shifts that happen in dementia, maintaining connections in spite of those changes, and reframing the relationship. And today's session is really about articulating these three issues of changing relationships and the reasons behind kind of why we feel the way we feel as caregivers. So I'm a person who has been a clinical social worker for over 20 years. And for about the first 20 years of my career, I worked for a large health system, a large organization here in the Portland area, and then left that system work a few years ago to develop a private practice where I meet with people, I consult with people who are caring for an individual with a dementia diagnosis. It's the sole population that I work with, and it's very much about helping people feel more situated and clear-eyed about the dementia experience and pathway that they're on, and helping them feel better supported and better connected as they go through the experience. So the work is really primarily with the individuals doing the caring for individuals with dementia. And then I also have a podcast called Hope Floats, which is also dedicated to topics for supporting caregivers who are doing this important work. And that is available on Spotify and on Apple and all of sort of those primary platforms that you can listen to podcasts on. And this is a picture of myself when I am probably 7 or 8 years old, gauging by my front teeth. I think those look like they're plenty in. So I think I'm probably 7 or 8. And this is my mom, Lynn. This is taken on our farm down in the valley in Monmouth, just south of Monmouth. And my mom, Lynn, was diagnosed in 2019 with mixed type dementia. And we are now several years into her dementia experience. In my practice with clients, I often say that dementia caregiving is really a largely unknowable experience unless you have experienced it yourself. My interest in dementia and my work in dementia predated my own parents' diagnosis by many, many years. But I would say it wasn't until I had the experience of caring for Lynn and cohabitating with Lynn in her dementia experience that I began to really understand what it's like to be a caregiver for a person with dementia. And for all of the professional experience and time and energy I have dedicated to trying to learn about dementia, nothing compares to having the lived personal experience. And I'm guessing that may resonate for some of you as well. I also want to name that while I'm having an experience of caring for a parent with dementia, the spousal caregiving role is not something that I have yet. Did I mute and now unmute? Can you hear me okay?
You're unmuted.
Okay, I just got a little signal that said I was muted. So sorry, I'm not sure why that happened. So as long as everybody can hear me, I'll just keep on trucking. So I don't bring to this talk today an intimate personal knowledge of spousal caregiving and the unique facets and the unique stressors that come with that. But I do spend much of my time meeting with spousal caregivers or partnered caregivers, hearing and holding with them those challenges that they are experiencing. So while I would never have chosen the dementia experience for Lynn or for my family, I am grateful to be learning from this experience. And I do call Lynn my greatest teacher. So let's jump into understanding a concept called ambiguous loss. And I say here that it's a framework for the grief in dementia caregiving that almost no one talks about. And I put almost in there because it does feel like in recent years, since I've been doing this work, that ambiguous loss is starting to gain a little bit of traction or momentum and coming into more of the experience of caregivers, understanding this concept. It seems to be being talked about more. But I would say it's not unusual for people to have not heard about it at all. And so I created this talk tonight coming from that perspective, trying to meet folks where they are if they have never heard of this concept before. So the concept was developed by a woman named Pauline Boss, Dr. Pauline Boss, who's a researcher and a therapist who studied families dealing with unclear loss. And I'll talk about that in a couple of slides. But situations where a loved one or a person that you are caring for is both physically present, but psychologically or emotionally absent or different in ways from how they were before. And many caregivers describe this as the hardest part of the dementia experience. So, ambiguous loss, one of the key insights is that when loss is ambiguous and unclear, we can't fully grieve because the loss is incomplete, it's ongoing. And that has an element of what we call frozen grief. And it can be one of the hardest emotional states for us as humans to live in. Oftentimes, many of us, myself included, really like things to not be in the gray or not be ambiguous. We like things to be very black and white. And ambiguous loss describes a loss that remains unclear and unresolved so long as the person is still alive. So the person that you love is physically present, but the relationship as you knew it is changing because of the changes being caused by dementia, by the brain changes themselves, the changes structurally and anatomically happening in dementia. So this framework can give language to an experience that many care partners or caregivers recognize pretty quickly. But your experience may not fit neatly into any of these single theories, and that's okay. This is just an idea for how to see and understand this experience you might be having. So this kind of loss is called ambiguous loss because there's no clear ending or goodbye, but there is at the time of death. And so that in and of itself kind of creates this strange relationship with death that we remain in this ambiguous state until something so final as death comes around. And in the dementia experience, as many of you have probably heard, the average length of experience is 8 to 10 years. And so that's a lot of time, nearly a decade of time to be spending in this state. Grief happens while the person is still alive, and that is uniquely challenging for most of us. Grieving a person while they are still alive kind of defies human logic. It defies how we kind of think about loss. And it can be a very unsettling and kind of bizarre experience. And society doesn't often recognize this kind of loss. When an individual dies, we have a pretty good script or understanding of how to show up for a person who has experienced that kind of loss. I had a friend whose parent passed away recently, and I kind of knew exactly how I was expected to show up, right? Attending a funeral, offering support. Someone started one of those meal trains, which is when you sign up to deliver a meal on a certain day, casseroles being delivered, those kinds of things. But society doesn't have those same kind of acknowledgments or recognition when it's ambiguous loss that's happening so gradually. And then it can also feel confusing, isolating, and invisible for those of us who are experiencing it. And I would say not only invisible to people, but also what they call sort of disenfranchised grief or unrecognized by people, meaning sometimes people caring for a person with dementia may hear from other people, well, at least you still have your person. At least your person's still alive. And there can be sort of what we call a disenfranchisement around that, that makes it feel unseen by people. So Dr. Pauline Boss identified two primary types of ambiguous loss, and I'm giving you the box on the left just as context because that's where Dr. Boss's work first originated. She was studying families who had lost individuals in the Vietnam War, so many decades ago. So type 1 is a person who is physically absent or gone, but psychologically present, meaning we still think about them all the time. They may be consuming our thoughts. So an example of this are missing persons, military deployment or missing in action, people of service, immigration, and also divorce. Type 2, which is the type that we're talking about tonight, and the type that is likely affecting you if you are caring for an individual with dementia, is when someone is physically present and psychologically absent, as I've mentioned in the past few slides. So the person is here beside you, but the connection, the memories, and the personality that you knew this person to have is shifting. And it's shifting because of the anatomical changes in dementia. The changes that are happening in the brain are robbing people from the ability to remember well and to continue to have a personality that they've always had. So, and I don't know if the phrase psychologically absent feels like the correct term for you. But it's just one way of thinking about this. Sometimes people also describe it as emotionally absent or cognitively absent. And it doesn't mean that the person is completely gone or is empty inside. It means that the connection that you once had with this individual and the way of reaching them that you once had is changing. So some examples of this would be sitting beside someone at dinner, and so they're physically with you, but yet they may not know who you are. I just got back from seeing my mom this past weekend, and this was certainly true for us. She has reached the moderate stage of her dementia, which is often a time when relationships and how they are related to a person become difficult for them to understand. So my mom sees me and knows me as a person who seems kind and familiar, I would say, based on how I greet her and my affect. I don't introduce myself as her daughter. I just say, "Hi, it's so good to see you," because she doesn't believe that she has children. And so when I tell her, I have actually, by trial and error, I've kind of come to this place where I don't say automatically that I'm her daughter. I just say, "Hi, it's so good to see you," because when I've reminded her that I'm her daughter, it makes her very anxious that she doesn't remember having had children. And I don't want to make her more anxious. So we'll talk about that in part 2 of the talk, about how to help our people stay out of distress. So other examples are they may laugh at something familiar, but the knowing of that inside joke that perhaps you have carried together is gone. And oftentimes people living with dementia and cognitive changes may be in very healthy bodies from the neck down. And the only organ that's really being impacted is their brain. So they have lots of capabilities. Their arms and their legs continue to work very well, but because their brain isn't working in the ways that we would need it to or want it to carry out tasks, oftentimes they are unable to do those things despite having a healthy body. And I also want to just name that this is not a failure on anyone's part. This is about dementia and dementia being brain failure. This is about brain failure. It's not about our people not trying hard enough. It's not about our folks trying to give us a hard time. It's that the brain is changing due to dementia. It's the nature of the condition. One of the other things that often happens and that I see in my practice is that grief in dementia rarely follows any kind of typical trajectory of grief, if there even is a typical trajectory of grief. The grief in dementia tends to come in waves, and it tends to come at different milestones in the disease experience. So oftentimes we are doing what's called serial, SERIAL, serial grieving. So we may be grieving at the time of diagnosis, and we may also be feeling affirmed to hear somebody, a professional, say, yes, this is really something, this is what we think it is. This is dementia. So it can be, we can feel shock, we can feel denial. That's very common too. But we can also feel affirmed. We also can experience grief around people's changing abilities. We can feel really frustrated and sad and lonely around some of those changes. We can often feel grief over the person that we knew. So dementia often impacts personhood and longstanding personality. And when those parts of us change because of dementia, it can create great sorrow in us. It can create a lot of exhaustion in us. And it can even make us feel kind of tender at times. I think another big milestone of grief in this dementia landscape and ambiguous loss is when placement or relocation of the individual occurs. So when it becomes too difficult to maintain an individual with dementia in their prior setting, the relocation process can be riddled with all kinds of big feelings, including helplessness, as you watch a whole new team or a whole new caregiver take on the role you had at one point. But you may also be feeling a lot of guilt, and you may even be feeling relief. And then there is grief that comes after the individual dies or passes on. And again, there's a term in dementia caregiving called grief, which is half grief and half relief, that the experience that this person has gone through has now concluded. I hear people name relief in that often, but also a lot of other things, deep sadness, feelings of emptiness, feelings of guilt. So all of that to say, you may experience all of these things. You may experience none of them. You may feel them in waves. You may feel them in any order. What I hope to convey here is that it is all really normal and very common. So let me go back a slide and just invite people. This is just an invitation, and not a subpoena or a command. So do with it what you'd like. But if there's any of these waves or categories of grief that you might be experiencing right now, you're welcome to share it in the chat if you would like to do so. And I'm going to ask Lynn and Julie to let me know if there are comments coming in about where folks might be feeling these waves. Yeah. Lynn, what are you seeing?
So far, I don't have anything here. The other thing that I wanted to ask you is if you I would be willing to let people speak. That would
Sure.
be
Yeah.
okay
If
with
people
you.
prefer. Yeah, sure. Great. Yeah.
So if
We
you
can
want
take
to
a minute to
raise your
do that.
hand, yeah, if people would like to raise their hand, when they do so, I will unmute them and they can ask their questions.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. So I had asked you, Lynn, to take this on, and then I just realized that I actually can see the chat now if I just
Yeah,
click on the
well,
right place.
right.
So yes, thank you, Liz. It sounds like this is resonating with you or affirming how you're feeling. And then Janet shares that the grief over the person I knew is constant for me. Yes, I hear this so often, Janet, that the person I knew is not accessible anymore. And there is deep grief in that. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And then Elaine shares that her spouse, let's see, Elaine says, my husband moved to memory care in December. Guilt, helplessness, and relief have been my companions ever since. Okay, so some of those descriptors on that slide, Elaine, resonate with you. Charlene says helplessness over changing abilities. Yes, challenges for how I can keep him as able and engaged as possible. Yes. And Christine, thank you. You've definitely felt new waves of grief at each decline. Yeah. Yes. Thank you, folks, for putting those in. I really appreciate you sharing. And Keith says, I'm grieving over my wife's loss of memory and increasing limitations. Yes, Keith, you are not alone. And I'm so sorry.
So I'd like to share what someone said to me today.
Yeah,
I
please.
hadn't seen them for a couple of months, and she told me that she rather unexpectedly had to place her husband, and
Mhm.
she's been busy grieving.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
then she didn't
Yeah.
expect that to happen.
Mm. Yeah, it's almost like everything's on the table. Right? With all these emotions, nothing surprises me anymore. We feel all kinds of things as caregivers in this role. I'm going to read one more, and then I'm going to move us on. But Joy, I want to read your comment here that grief and anger make me very tired and unable to focus. Yeah. Oof. And you feel your spouse is no longer a lover, but a patient, and that makes you feel really bad. Yes, I would say, Joy, you are not alone in that. And to go from intimate partner or lover to a nurse, feeling like a nurse or a caregiver is a very different kind of role and a very different shift. And it makes sense to me that you are deeply missing that prior connection. Okay, folks, I'm going to move us on. Um, okay, I think if I can. Okay, so how do our relationships change? Let's talk about how relationships actually change. Um, this section is about naming what's happening in our day-to-day life when we are caregivers, the shifts in communication, the shifts in intimacy, partnership, connection. And because dementia typically moves pretty slowly, we say in dementia it's slow to grow. It's not usually hallmarked by really significant changes. I shouldn't say significant changes, really rapid changes. Often, if it's a rapid change, we think delirium. Dementia, typically, regardless of what of the 100 different types of dementia your person may have, typically moves more slowly than that. Some subtypes do move more quickly, but usually over months and years, not in 24-hour cycles. So these changes, because they move so slowly, actually, then they tend to be gradual, the changes. And so that can make them much harder to see for us as people who are doing the caring. And this gradual shift often feels like it's happening so slowly that we may not notice until we realize, oh my goodness, something really fundamental is different. Or sometimes it takes the out of town adult child or the out of town sibling or someone else who isn't in the day to day to tell us, boy, I'm really seeing some changes here. Oftentimes when we're in the day to day, it can be more difficult to see. So things like conversations that used to last for hours and have deep exchange and reciprocity, right, in how you communicated. Now, with disease progression, maybe just a few simple sentences. And there's even uh, such a loss of speech and language with disease progression of dementia that oftentimes what's called functional speech, so using way fewer words, is actually better communication tool, a better communication tool for people with dementia. But that's a very different way of communicating with your person than a banter back and forth, right? Decisions that you once made may now fall to you alone as the surrogate brain, as we often say in this work. Your person is no longer able to do shared decision making, and so the decisions now have to be made by you. And so there's a real thing of decision fatigue, exhaustion, from just the overwhelming number of decisions. I think I read once the average human makes about 35,000 decisions a day. Now, many of those are sort of unconscious and we do without even thinking about them. But when you're caring for a person who's having trouble making decisions, as is very common and normal in dementia, your cognitive workload just doubled or increased by quite a few percentage points. Intimacy, so from familiar closeness or sexual intimacy to new forms of connection or the absence of intimacy is a big challenge, particularly in the spousal or partner relationship. Shared memories, so mutual recall, sharing knowledge about significant life events, those things tend to look very different when your person has dementia. And then daily routines significantly shift with the weight of the scale getting heavier and heavier on the side of the caregiver, as a person may go from being somewhat independent in the earlier stages of dementia, being able to contribute to some of the activity or routine, or do a lot of those parts and pieces by themselves, to an interdependence, meaning they really need some support with that, but they can still contribute some. And then in the latter stages of the dementia experience, it's usually hallmarked by a full dependency on others to carry out daily routines, and that's a significant load for caregivers. And that understandably brings up a lot of emotions for caregivers. They carry an enormous emotional load. So you might feel loneliness when you are in the same room or sitting right next to your person. You might feel guilt. I hear caregivers talk about guilt all the time. I also feel like women caregivers carry an enormous amount of guilt. I see it in the male caregivers that I work with as well. But I think a lot of people are hardwired to blame themselves over blaming others. I'm not even hardwired, probably socialized for that. And I don't know if folks on this call are familiar with a national dementia expert named Tammy Anastasia. But Tammy talks about guilt, has a lot of really interesting insights about guilt and just its uselessness in the dementia landscape, and does not want any of us using our valuable energy on guilt. But she often says it's a placeholder. She talks about it as a placeholder for all of the other really big emotions that we have about being in this role. And it's kind of the more acceptable place to have all those emotions sit, right? To feel guilt. Anger is very normal and very common. And if we're being really honest, it's probably not just at the disease. It's probably sometimes at our person. It's a pretty common thing to feel. And when we try to continue to stuff that down or not name that with caring others, then it can grow in us. And the last place that we want to exhibit that anger is towards our person with dementia, who is doing the best that they can, whether that's believable some days or not. I really, truly believe people with dementia are doing the best they can. And so what are our outlets and channels for the really understandable anger that we might be feeling as caregivers? We can feel a lot of love for our folks. It can be both a deepening of love, but also a lessening of love can happen in the sense of a pulling back, a retraction of our love because we want to self-protect against some of the devastation that we might be feeling and the loss we might be feeling. I think a couple people in the chat a bit ago named exhaustion. At least one person named exhaustion as something that they're experiencing. And I would say yes, especially if and as your person's nighttime sleep cycles have been disrupted by dementia. If you're not getting good restorative sleep, that's incredibly difficult. Oops, I'm sorry. I just went too far. There we go. We call that cumulative exhaustion as the disease grows. And then there can even be moments of real tenderness. I feel the most tender around my parent when I see her really vulnerable, or I see her really struggling with sadness. My heart breaks for her and I feel a real tenderness towards her. I was noticing that in myself this past weekend with her. And then I also felt the full panoply of emotions as well. I felt anger. I felt guilty for having anger. I felt it all when I was with her. So, and I don't think these emotions make us bad people. I think it means that we are human and we're having the human experience. So I'm going to check my time here. Okay. I want to take a moment and just ask, what is one thing about your relationship that has changed and one thing that hasn't changed? If you are interested in putting that in the chat, that would be great. I'll keep my eye on it. We'll spend just a minute or two on this. One of the things truly, you don't have to put anything in the chat if you don't want to, but one of the things I really like about people putting things in the chat is that it validates, I think, and normalizes for the rest of us, like, oh, I'm not by myself in this. Other people feel this way too. And now that I said that, yeah. And that's okay too. You are not obligated to put anything in the chat. Let's see here. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yes, Liz, so much struggle there in those two sentences. I'm so sorry. Okay. Finances are a struggle. Yep, Keith, you are meeting her where she needs you to meet her and taking over those finances. Good job. Good job. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you have to do that. It sounds like that was something your wife was able to manage. But I'm really glad you are because there's big vulnerability in that area of financial management, right? Anyone else? Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to move us along here. I'm actually going to just briefly mention, because I think it does merit this. Oftentimes we're talking about dementia caregiving from a very sort of American Western-centric lens. I think my external bias is to see things through that lens. But I also want to name that there are many cultures out there that actually view dementia differently. They view dementia as a natural part of aging. Others actually we do have stigma here in America around the topic of dementia. But there are other cultures who do have significant stigma and can see it as spiritual punishment or something that someone has done wrong in either past lives or in their life. And there can be a lot of family shame around it, what's called kind of a genetic taint. If a person has a grandparent or a person in their life with dementia. So I just want to name that this is a pretty complex topic, and this talk is not dedicated to probably what this part of dementia care deserves. So I just want to say every family and every culture is different, and culture is a source of strength typically. It's not a problem to solve, and many families and cultures really care well for their people with dementia. But I raise this because caregiving happens within a cultural context for many people, and understanding that context will help us support each other better. So this is a topic for another talk sort of dedicated solely to that, but I just wanted to name that this is probably a very Western-centric way of talking about dementia that I'm doing today. And there are a couple other dot points there for you to consider. So let's talk about this changing role. So this is the third part of our conversation here. So I recognize that many of you did not choose your role as a caregiver. And in caregiving, there's a concept called role captivity that has to do with people not having a choice in the matter, not having agency or the ability to have decided to be in this role. And that matters because people who don't choose this role often have higher stress loads because of that. So anytime we as humans feel like we have some agency or choice, our cortisol levels tend to go down a little bit. We like having choice, we like having agency. And when we don't have choice or agency around this being either thrust into this role or being sort of expected to be in this role, we can feel trapped. And that can really increase stress load. So that's something to just consider as you are thinking about your own stress load. Like, how much agency or choice did you have when this caregiving role came into your life, whether or not, or as to whether you wanted to take it on or not. And the other challenge here, I think, is that caregiving happens gradually because dementia typically unfolds gradually, right? And so what you were experiencing when your person was in the earlier stages of decline is going to look different when they've moved into the more middle stage or moderate stage. And that will look very different from the latter stage of the disease. So without really realizing it, all of a sudden you can sort of like, oh my goodness, I'm doing all of the things, right? I'm managing medications, I'm managing finances, I'm managing daily care. It really adds up. And care partners or caregivers are often wearing a lot of hats simultaneously. And sometimes switching between them multiple times in a day, multiple times in an hour. So being a spouse or partner or a parent to your parent, if you are caring for a parent with dementia. So trying to maintain that loving relationship while also delivering care. You may be doing all of the household management tasks or realizing, oh boy, I really need to be taking on more and more of these things to keep us safe and successful here in our home. You may have also realized, oh boy, this is its own talk, what it takes to navigate our medical system successfully. And it is a big energy drainer for many people. I do a lot of talks for health system employees to help them understand what is on the plate of caregivers of people with dementia and how we can do a better job of showing up for them. That's its own talk. But medical advocacy is a huge part of what I hear caregivers saying that they spend their time and energy on. And then this other piece here about emotional anchor. So providing comfort, stability, and presence for your person with dementia is probably the most important hat, arguably, that we wear in dementia caregiving. And part of that is because dementia does not yet have a cure. And what we are left with is care. caring for our person in the right way. And what that requires of us is kind of overhauling and changing how we've always been in relationship with them and learning new tools around how to be in interactions with our person that provide them with comfort, provide them with stability and a sense of everything is okay. It's like learning a new language. And yet, when caregivers learn those new tools and can start to make that shift to caring differently for their person, things often go better. So, okay, and we're going to talk more about that in the part 2 talk in June. And through it all, through wearing all of these hats, you're still a spouse, you're still a parent, you're still a friend. Those identities of who you are in relationship with other people doesn't disappear just because caregiving for your person has now become sort of the sole, most foregrounded role that you're in. But it can sure feel like it's the only role, right? Okay. So there's a lot of trying to hold two truths at once. This is the both and concept, not either or, black and white, but rather both and. And we often find ourselves sitting with this sort of internal contradiction. We can deeply love a person and also feel resentment for our situation and our circumstances. We can want the best for them and also want our lives back. These aren't really opposing feelings. They're both true at the same time. And when we give ourselves permission to hold both of these truths at the same time, we can work towards releasing some of that guilt and shame that makes caregiving even harder. It's a hard enough job. And when we're piling on ourselves with any guilt or shame that we should be doing it better, we shouldn't feel these things that are on the right-hand side of your screen. It makes things just so much harder. So I listed a couple of these here. I'm grateful for our time together, and I'm exhausted by the demands. I want to be patient, and I feel really frustrated and overwhelmed. And I grieve who they were, and I'm working hard to accept who they are now. That is a work that you will likely be doing for as long as you are in this role. And both of those truths in those examples can live in you at the same time. So I want to name here, this may be one of the most important slides in this slide deck. Recognizing when you need more support. There are some real physical warning signs that we get. Our bodies give us these warning signs of chronic exhaustion that doesn't go away when we have a good night's sleep. Frequent illness or headaches or unexplained pain and significant changes in our own sleep patterns or appetite can be harbingers of burnout, that we are just kind of getting to the end of our rope. There's some emotional red flags, feelings of hopelessness or true emptiness, withdrawal from others. I hear a lot of caregivers talk about the withdrawal that other people do from their lives. That's hard enough. But if you yourself are experiencing withdrawal from people who are still showing up for you and want to involve you in their lives, that is a sign that you may be feeling overwhelmed. And then an inability to feel joy or emotional numbness. Alcohol, medication, and other substances to cope are understandable tools, and they usually are a signal that things are starting to feel really unbalanced. Neglecting our own medical appointments and health needs happens often for caregivers and puts us at higher risk for all kinds of health issues. And when we don't attend to our own sort of preventative care, we may miss things that we could have caught earlier if we had just been able to step away from our role and see the doctor or see our provider. And if resentment is becoming the dominant emotion in your caregiving, that's a flag. It's a pink flag. So normal grief, which is expected and quote unquote healthy kinds of grief, that's different than the kind of grief that may be all consuming and really creating such significant trauma and waves in your life that you need some extra support. So if your symptoms are persisting for weeks and they're getting worse, I really encourage you to reach out and start perhaps by reaching out to your own primary person, your own primary care provider, and letting them know that you are experiencing caregiver exhaustion and depletion. And I think, and I hope that this slide deck has given you some good language and some good data as to why you are feeling depleted, if that's your situation. And that seeking help is an act of strength. So here are some ideas. I don't love telling any caregivers how they should proceed with self-care because I feel that people know their situations best, but these are just suggestions for what might be helpful for you. So take what you want from this, and if things don't resonate, I'm going to ask in a little bit that we share some of the things that we do that are helpful for us as caregivers. So just naming what we carry, part of why I like to do these talks and give terms that are known in the caregiver literature, like role captivity, is that I hope that it can help people sort of name what they're carrying. And oftentimes there's a quip that's like, name it to tame it, right? Like just knowing what something is and being able to articulate that and name that can be helpful. It can be an intervention that takes some of the negative hold away. However you can. And I would recommend both of Tammy Anastasia's books on caregiving. I can put those in the chat once we get to the Q&A. Working to release guilt, which really is just an unproductive, unhelpful emotion for us as caregivers to carry. You are doing an incredible job in one of the hardest roles on the planet. And we can't do it perfectly. Imperfect care given with love is still really good care for our individuals that we're caring for. Many of us don't feel that comfortable asking for what we need, but in this role, it's really important to advocate for ourselves. And I think it's actually really helpful for people who care about you, who are on the periphery, to hear from you as a caregiver what specifically could be helpful. So oftentimes, there are people kind of out on the periphery who care about you and who would help, but they really don't know how. I hear that from people. And if we can name for them sort of proactively, hey, if you brought a meal by on the first Thursday of the month, that would mean a lot to me. And then give them the agency to say yes or no to that. But naming what you need can be very helpful. Protecting our time, boundaries are difficult to set and they're even harder to hold, but boy, are they important. And practicing setting boundaries is one of the best things that we can do as caregivers, saying no to the things that are really depleting you as a caregiver. It's okay to pause around those and consider whether or not you need to continue to say yes to the things that you don't want to say yes to. And I'm sure people will have about 50 examples of why that's not possible, but please hear the spirit with which I'm saying that if you have a discernment process and give yourself permission to sift through the things that you really don't have the energy for, that's okay. And then staying connected, there is a lot of support out there. It doesn't knock on our doors necessarily, but places like Hope Dementia Support and other systems-based supports, I have a slide here in a second that will articulate a couple. we're not designed to do this work alone. Brene Brown has a quote that is that we can't always change hard, but we can change lonely, right? We can't always impact the things that are hard or make the hard go away, but we can change the isolation of the experience. And in a landscape of dementia where we don't have cure and we don't have significantly attuned good tools yet for changing the disease trajectory, being in relationship with other people who know how this feels or can say to you, I get it, me too, and offering each other support and offering each other what has worked for you can be a lifesaver in this landscape. So if you're not already connected with at least one other person, I would encourage you to reach out and get connected. So here are some of those resources here. We've got the Alzheimer's Association has a 24/7 helpline that is staffed by master's level people who can hear what's going on for you and give you good practical advice. I really also like the Dementia Society of America. If folks haven't heard of them, I think they're a little lesser known, but they do really strong work in the dementia landscape, including a free Ask the Expert series every Monday. People can call in or write in their questions or concerns for the dementia expert that I named earlier, Tammy Anastasia. And if you go to their website, you can find out all kinds of resources and tools from the Dementia Society of America. There are really good local caregiver support groups like the Hope Dementia Support Group. Hope Dementia Support, which has support groups, but oh so much more, right? And Lynn and Julie are the ones that can name those things for us today. And respite care services in our communities. If you're, I guess, anywhere you may be listening in from or watching from this evening, you can look up your ADRC or Area Agency on Aging on the computer and see what comes up for your local area. Sometimes counseling and therapy for care partners is extremely helpful. And I say that also knowing how challenging it can be to find a therapist. So if somebody offers to help you with anything, you might say, I'm really struggling. I would love some support around finding a good therapist. Is that something you can help me sort through some websites around or find people in my area? And then based on the topic of tonight of ambiguous loss, I really recommend the book Loving Someone Who Has Dementia by Pauline Boss, which I should have right in front of me. I don't. I was going to show it to you. So Loving Someone Who Has Dementia by Pauline Boss is an excellent book on caregiving and reframing, trying to aim for perfection in a relationship to what she calls the good enough relationship, a relationship that honors your person with dementia, but does not engulf you in the experience and by the experience. So as hopefully promised, let's see, 7:29. Join us on June 30th for part 2 of When the Relationship Changes. And these are the things we're going to take a deeper dive in. When I said the emotional hat that you wear is one of the most important hats that you wear, this is what I mean. Communicating and learning how to better communicate with your person can be very helpful. It can be a very helpful tool. So we're going to talk about how communication shifts, but also how to help it shift in the right direction so that your person with dementia is less frustrated, and then you are less frustrated because they're less frustrated. We're going to talk about maintaining connection in new ways, caring for yourself. We touched on it tonight, but we're going to talk more granularly about it. And we'll also talk about reframing the relationship. So I'm going to, thank you for having me, here is how to reach me if you are interested in reaching out and talking with me or working with me. This is how to do it by going to the website here. And I think now those are the references. I will stop sharing, and I'd love to bring us back together for Q&A, but also reflection and discussion. We are all experts on this call. So let's put our collective wisdom together here for the next 30 minutes and have a conversation. So let me stop sharing. Okay. I'm going to take a look at the chat. Okay, so Joy, you're sharing about, yeah, that's, whew. I feel like uh, we've had, Julie and Lynn, I think we've had some support training specifically about intimacy and sexuality in dementia.
We actually have at least 2 YouTube videos.
Oh, great.
So our YouTube station is Hope Dementia Support. So if you were to Google YouTube Hope Dementia Support, that would come up, and all of our presentations are there, and that includes a couple related to sexuality. And if anyone has never listened to Joyce Beadle talk about sexuality and dementia, you have to. It's such an important topic, and she makes it not difficult, and sometimes things are funny when you don't know they're funny, and it makes it more palatable to be able to even think about it. And that's what Joyce is good for. And you know her well, so
yeah, she gives a great talk, gives great talks. And also, I want to just name, I'm trusting most of us on this call are over 18. So let's just name human beings are sexual beings. And when we don't talk about that, I'm not saying it needs to be talked about in every setting we encounter, but there are spaces for it. And there are spaces where it's really important to talk about how this important part of our lives, this part of being human, gets impacted in dementia in all kinds of ways. So thank you for sharing that information about the YouTube channel. Teresa, you're happy to hear about relief, but also grief. Yeah. Carrying both of those things. I think that's why they call it grief, right? The combination of those two things. And Elaine, you are really missing some of the things. It sounds like you and your partner had some real, some physical outlets for or interests in how you chose to spend your time hiking and biking. And yeah, my hope is that there are opportunities for you to continue doing the things that bring you joy while you also get support, kind of mourning those losses. Yeah. Charlene, I love this. Yes. So you still share humor. Love that. And yeah, it's hard to think of things that haven't changed. Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty normal. Dementia really can impact just about everything, right? And Teresa, let's see. How to know all the resources when you need them, regardless of the day or hour, to avoid caregiver burnout and stress. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, Teresa, maybe what you're referencing there is kind of the overwhelm that comes with, it seems like oftentimes people are given, they either have no resources or knowledge of resources, or we give them a list of 50 things, right? And or 50 resources, and then it's like, well, now what do I do, right? And that's where talking with someone about your specific situation, even calling that number at the Alzheimer's Association or calling the ADRC and saying, here's my situation. I'm a person who is caring for a person with dementia, and naming what your role is. Are you an adult child? Are you a spouse? Are you a partner? Are you a sibling? And also, what I think really matters whenever I'm making a recommendation about how best to support the caregiver and the person living with brain changes, two things really matter. Actually, three things really matter to me. One is um, what type of dementia has this person been diagnosed with? What stage do we think they're in? And by stage, I don't mean like fast score 6, fast score 7. I mean, are they in the early stage, the middle stage, or the late stage? Because all three of those stages are almost like its own unique disease. And then the third thing that I would want to know is what level of insight does the person living with brain changes have about their condition? So this is in the landscape of dementia, this is called anosognosia, which is another, it's like ambiguous loss. Starts with an A, not very well known. Anosognosia is the brain's inability to have insight into its own condition or deficits. And it's very common in dementia. And for people caring for an individual with dementia, if you are caring for a person who has no idea that they have a brain deficit, that's a different set of challenges that you're experiencing, right? There's no rationalizing with someone, there's no sort of tethering them to reality. That's really an important thing to understand about your person is their level of anosognosia. So what dementia type do they have? What stage are they in? And how much anosognosia or insight or lack of insight do they have into their condition? Okay, Sharon says, I have read a number of books and articles on dementia and caregiving. Oh, your talk has taught me. Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. That's very kind, Sharon. Thank you so much. I deeply appreciate that.
Don't think you're done though.
No, I mean,
I
I'd love
have
to sign off on that note because that's really kind. But
I have
no,
a
we have
number of questions for you yet.
great,
We've
great.
been collecting questions.
Okay, great.
So, how would you explain ambiguous loss in a way that families immediately recognize it in themselves?
Immediately recognize it in themselves. Well, I mean, I tried to lay out in this talk the kind of the most basic way to go about understanding ambiguous loss. And if I'm reading between the lines, which the good news is you can tell me if I am or getting this right or not, I
Yes.
wonder if what you're saying is I've got family members who don't see ambiguous loss in themselves. And if that's the case, I wonder if saying, I saw a talk about a concept called ambiguous loss, and it really resonated. This concept really resonated with me, and I wonder if it's impacting our family. I wonder if there's some kind of unrecognized or under-recognized aspects of ambiguous loss going on here for us. And I would love a chance to talk about it with you. And even I did an ambiguous loss reading group with my siblings. So when we realized we were on the dementia pathway with my mom, I said, I love this idea of ambiguous loss because it resonates with me and what might be going on for us. And I wonder if anyone would be willing to join me in an online, this was also back in 2019. So we were doing like a lot of online Zooming things, but well, 2020. So we met every month and read a chapter. We came prepared having read a chapter. Now, if you have a sibling system in your family or a family system where you are not in accord, that's not going to work. But I think it's always okay to name something that you saw or heard that really resonated and makes you wonder if it isn't present in our family's situation. And would it be okay to talk about it? That's an idea.
I think it's a good one. I think depending on what your background is, I think the term ambiguous loss is like speaking another language.
Oh, yeah.
People have
Oh,
no
yeah.
idea what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. No, I think that's really fair. Ambiguous means capable of being understood in two or more possible ways. But it's sort of this ambiguous loss is a fancy kind of an obnoxious label, if you will, right? For how I broke down someone who is physically present and yet seemingly psychologically absent from us. Maybe that's what you call it. There's a weird kind of loss in dementia. I mean, you can throw out the label if it doesn't work for you or if it doesn't resonate, but hang on to the concept because I do think the concept it resonates with people.
well, the fact that you can identify, maybe you can't define ambiguous loss, but you can certainly identify that you've lost someone who's still here.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah,
Which
I like that.
which brings me to the next question.
Sure. Are these your questions, Lynn, or are these audience questions? I'm just curious.
No, these Julie and I have a system, and we always have a bunch of questions
I
just in
love it.
case, just in
I
case.
love it. Good. All right, fire away.
And I just told the audience our secret. So
This is what you get, audience, if you're quiet. Yeah.
so
Okay.
so why can ambiguous loss feel different from traditional grief? What's the difference?
Oh boy. Well, I mean, I think when I think about traditional grief, I think about I was going to say closure, but we know that when we grieve the loss of a person through death, there often does not feel like closure. Um, so traditional grief. Yeah, I think it's about some of the things I spoke about in the talk, where it's a bit disenfranchised to have ambiguous loss versus traditional grief. I think we know how to show up, how we're supposed to show up well for people who are going through traditional grief. And traditional grief is usually hallmarked by a really significant, kind of unchangeable outcome, right? Like the death of an individual.
Well, and I think it also helps to understand disenfranchised grief. Things like
Hmm.
somebody who has um, I used to teach the end of life nursing curriculum,
Hmm.
and a piece of that was disenfranchised grief. And then we
Yeah.
talk about the stillborn,
Mm.
um,
Mm.
about the gay partner,
Hmm.
about the girlfriend who was somebody else's wife.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that dementia grieving that ambiguous loss, it's how can you grieve somebody who is still here?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's where it's disenfranchised
Hmm.
from my standpoint. So that's my thoughts
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, we called it frozen grief in the talk, but it feels like a little bit of stunted grief too, right? Like we're not really permitted to, or we can't quite make sense. It's a very strange human experience to grieve someone who is still with us. And then there's the sort of the guilt and shame for feeling like we're grieving a person who is still, well, they haven't died. Like, why am I so sad? Well, the person that this person has been that I've known throughout their life is significantly changed by the disease experience. And some people will say, actually, they're not significantly changed. We just have not found a way to reach them yet. But I am not a big, huge subscriber of saying that people with dementia are not undergoing significant changes. I mean, um, yeah, I just I think that is difficult for caregivers to hear or wrap their minds around.
So we have some comments.
Hmm.
Uh, he says it seems that there is a hesitation to share how our faith is helpful in navigating this journey. People say what I believe is private. or it's not politically correct. We are not only relational people, but we are also spiritual.
Mhm.
Amen.
Amen. That might be the
Amen.
best response. Yeah, I agree with you, Keith. I think even the word faith can make some people go, uh-oh. Is this, are we talking about religion? Are we talking about spirituality? Does what I believe matter? And are people going to judge what I believe? I think there's a lot of worry about that out there. Or if I have a different belief system than the mainstream, whatever that is, belief system, is that going to ruffle feathers, or are people going to judge me for that? So I agree. It's a very, um, yeah, I mean, there are lots of feelings about faith and religion and spirituality. And I think that's an example of where it really helps to talk about our own personal experience, right? And not assume what anyone else might be feeling, but just sharing what may be important to us. I used to be in a role when I worked for that large health organization that part of um, part of our intake process was to ask people if there was a faith tradition or a religious or spiritual faith, tradition that was important to them that they would like us to know about. And I think it was the part about that you would like us to know about that helped people not feel judged, or that answering the question was optional. And sometimes people would be like, nope, nothing you need to know. And sometimes people would be like, yeah, thank you for asking. I'm Seventh-day Adventist, and here's what that means to me. So you really never know how the question is going to land.
Well, and that is, as long as I was a nurse, that was always part of nursing intake. So,
Okay. Yeah. And I think when people bristle at the question, I think it's a fear of being judged. Or maybe they really truly feel like it's no one else's business. And I would say, I think the question in medical settings, I hope, is being asked because we want to be able to meet people where they are and respect any sort of spiritual or faith traditions that a person might have that we might not be aware
I
of.
think that's
So,
absolutely true.
yeah.
Being
Yeah.
very old, I can tell you when there was not a true definition of a chaplain, which
Mm,
a chaplain is not a religious entity, it's a spiritual
right.
one, and it's to meet people where they're at. And by the way, Keith, I really, really appreciate you bringing that up
Yeah.
because we do tend
Same.
to leave it out.
Yeah.
So, and you see these others.
I think so. Yeah. What else you got? We got about 12 minutes.
All right, well, I've got some hard ones for you.
Oh boy. Okay. Well, this is also the end of the day. So my cognitive fuel tank,
Okay, okay.
you can soft lob or go ahead and punt out a
So,
hard one and we'll do our best.
and you may have covered this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. And
Okay.
that is, what are some signs? In fact, I know that you did. That a care partner may be struggling with ambiguous loss, but not realizing it.
Oh, yeah.
And a
I mean,
lot
I
of those,
think, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Go
signs
ahead.
and symptoms kind of things. But
Yeah.
other comments on that?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's something that is often not recognized in us, that we're carrying. I get a lot of like, oh, I mean, I know for me, when I first heard of the concept, I was like, oh, I didn't even think about that. Yeah. So I think it's quite common.
And how does society's misunderstanding of dementia complicate ambiguous loss?
I mean, how does society's misunderstanding of dementia not complicate anything, any of these facets? I, so I think this is also part of what I named in the beginning, 2 slides in, 3 slides in. Dementia is an unknowable experience. This is why, and this is a belief that I carry. It's an unknowable experience if you have not gone through it yourself or been touched by it intimately. And when I I see people really not getting it. I think people don't understand dementia at all, and they certainly don't recognize the enormity of the role, the understandable depletion that people are feeling, how complex the care is, how much is being foisted onto caregivers that used to be done by other professionals. And I mean, ambiguous loss is just one more thing that we are not recognizing in caregivers, that caregivers are going through. And I think a part of that too is related to the disenfranchised piece here, where unless you are going through a dementia caregiving experience, a lot of people ghost. They step away from involvement. Which is part of why I encourage people to really get language for what you're going through and be able to name specifically what would be helpful to you. That was rambly.
Well, I am 10 years out, and I can tell you that I am still incredibly resentful at how people fell away.
Say more.
Fortunately, not my children, but people that were close friends were just gone.
Yeah.
And yet they all showed up at his memorial service.
Yeah.
10 years and I still am resentful. Bad person.
Yeah. No.
But so on that topic, how can families navigate situations where members are grieving differently or disagreeing about care? That's the helicopter or not. No, excuse me, the seagull families. Are you familiar with the seagull families?
Tell me about the Siegel family. I think I have a sense of what you mean, but
Probably have a sense of it. I'm not going to say it because it's rude. But they're the folks who fly in, make a mess of everything, and then fly out again.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's the school of thought of like name what you need and tell people what you need. And the danger of allowing people in who are only going to make your role in your life harder. And I think I nodded to this in one of the self-care slides towards the end of like boundaries may end up being your best friend. If you have a seagull family or seagull family members that come and just make it worse, or even worse than that, stay less than 72 hours, because 72 hours is the minimum amount of time you should spend with an individual with dementia if you want to understand what's truly going on. Anything less than that, not helpful, because the person with dementia is likely able to kind of perform a little bit. So what's even worse are family members who come to town for 24, 36, 48 hours, stay at a hotel even, see mom or dad episodically, and they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I don't know why you're so burned out. They seem fine to me. I think this is a you
exactly.
problem. Yeah.
Exactly.
And that is not a helpful individual for you to have on your team. And it doesn't mean I'm suggesting a cutoff. It's families are incredibly complex, and dementia is a litmus test for the family's ability to function prior to the onset of dementia. It will bring out the best parts of a family, and it will bring out the worst parts of a family.
For sure. So, what advice do you have for adult children who are watching changes in the parents' relationships and may be concerned about the often elderly parent who is taking care of the other?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is 60% of the consults that I do. Um, I would say work to meet your parent. So what I'm imagining in that scenario is one cognitively sort of typical parent who's still got the capacity to do most of the things, caring for another parent with cognitive decline.
Yes.
Right? Okay. Understand their overload. So cohabitating spousal caregivers are our most depleted type of caregiver because the exposure to it is unrelenting, given the cohabitation experience, living together experience. And it is not always true that the spousal caregiver is an older adult, but it is often true that they are an older adult, which means they may be experiencing their own health issues and conditions, right? Or keeping those just under the surface. So I always recommend doing a very soft, um, hey, I would love to take you out to coffee and hear more about how this dementia experience, caregiving experience is going for you. I sat through a talk recently. This is something you might say. I sat through a talk recently that really helped build my understanding of kind of the enormity of the tasks on your plate, and also is helping me understand that dementia caregiving is not a one person job. And it's not because of any shortcomings of a caregiver, it's because the disease and the needs associated with disease will just get too big. And so I want to show up for you as well as possible as your adult child. We're on the same team. And I would probably try to start with a conversation with that tone and tenor. I can tell you, um, from my work with caregivers who have adult children, who they experience them as pretty this is a generalization, but I will say there are many of them who say my adult children don't get it, and I feel really judged by them, and I feel really criticized by them. I feel like they don't see how hard I work. So I would lead with, I see how hard you're. I'm amazed by how you're doing, because if they are hanging in there, they're doing a good job, right? I'm not saying they're doing it perfectly, but I would start by validating how hard you see them working. And then it's a series of conversations after that that we don't have time to. I mean, it's one of the things I work with people in my consulting practice.
Well, and I think that that is a good answer for the next question, which is how can friends and extended family better support someone experiencing ambiguous loss? But that would also be the work that's involved as they're losing their person. And
Yeah.
I do have to share that
Yeah.
in my support groups over the years, what I tend to hear is, well, my children want me to place him,
Uh-huh.
and that
Yeah.
uh,
Yes. And yes, they do, because they're terrified of what's going to happen to sort of the well spouse or the well parent.
right, right.
Yeah. And they see the depletion. Yeah.
Well, we're 2 minutes here. So our favorite question is
Uh-oh.
always, what would you like our audience to know? Besides that we have a the rest of this talk in a month.
Yeah. Well, first, I just want to acknowledge. So first of all, I can't see a view, which is just it's a wild thing to do these Zoom calls and to speak to a screen. But I want to thank you for using your valuable limited time and energy tonight to come and hear this information. And I want to underscore how lucky we are to have you in this role. And so I deeply appreciate you, even though I can't see you. And um, I I want to also convey that you are not alone in this. There are so many of us going through this, and we are stronger as a community together when we can connect with people who are going through similar experiences. And I hope that that feels hopeful to you. And I hope that there were hopeful morsels in here. I know how difficult the dementia landscape is. And thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Shoshana. It was really excellent.
Thank you.
Take
Okay.
care.
We'll see you all next month, I hope.
See
Okay.
you next month.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.